In the midst of an Omicron outbreak and almost 2 years after New Zealand shut its borders, the government has announced its latest reopening plan. For most New Zealanders, the coming months will be their first direct experience of widespread COVID-19. No one, not even the minister in charge, knows what exactly will come next. I think we're all nervous about what the next few months has in store for New Zealand, Chris Hipkins, the minister responsible for the country's pandemic response, told The Guardian. COVID-19, and Omicron in particular, is here now. It is in New Zealand and it will spread. We know that is going to happen. The extent of that, the effectiveness of our public health measures, the effect on our health system and on our most vulnerable populations is still something that's the subject of models rather than reality. The border has been the linchpin of New Zealand's COVID response, the crucial ingredient of its long virus-free stretches, and the primary reason that it is now facing down endemic infection with a highly vaccinated population. That border coming down is a symbol of how radically New Zealand's pandemic response has shifted over the last 6 months, from the relentless pursuit of COVID-0 to a gradual acceptance that COVID had arrived and would spread throughout the country. For some people, Hipkins thinks the spread of Omicron and reopening of the borders will come with a shock that the path to rebuild normality and travel infrastructure to and from the country will be slow. I think there's a view that seems to have formed amongst some people that the rest of the world is sort of back to normal, he says. Normal is still a way away. And not all of that's going to be within New Zealand's control. We've still got COVID-19 spreading around the world. There's still the potential for new variants of COVID-19. It's not like you suddenly turn on a switch and all the planes go back into the air and everything's back to the way it was. New Zealand's strict COVID border measures have left many New Zealanders separated from family for long periods. Photograph, Zinua, REX, Shutterstock. The drawbridge will start easing down later this month, opening first to New Zealanders coming from Australia, then a few weeks later to New Zealanders elsewhere, then Australians, visa holders, and finally everyone else. The reopening is marked by New Zealand's now customary caution staggered over nearly 9 months. It will not be open to all international tourists and travellers until October 2022. Our restrictions there have served us well as a country, but they were only ever intended to be temporary. I think everybody would agree it's not feasible to keep those kinds of restrictions in place for a prolonged period, he says. If anything, I think most of us wouldn't have envisioned they would be in place for as long as they have been. A festering sore point. The announcement of reopening will not come as a surprise to most New Zealanders. In the last month, pressures at the border had been boiling over. The story of Charlotte Bellis, the pregnant journalist who had approached the Taliban to stay in Afghanistan after initially being declined entry to New Zealand, had made international headlines. Other stories of families divided, children unable to visit terminally ill parents, people stranded without visas or jobs, had been accumulating. A group of citizens stranded overseas had brought a court case against the government, challenging the legality of barring them from entry. Finally, the spread of Omicron within New Zealand's borders meant strict policies to keep it out looked increasingly untenable. I don't have any regrets about the concept of having MIQ, managed isolation and quarantine, Hipkins says. But we're acutely aware of the pressure that's built up while there have been these restrictions. New Zealanders do accept that we can't live a life of suspended animation indefinitely, Chris Hipkins. The border had become a festering sore point in the country's policy, with those overseas arguing the lottery for quarantine was arbitrary, unfair, and inhumane. I would acknowledge how difficult it's been for them, and I'll actually say thank you to them on behalf of the whole country, who because of the sacrifices that they have made have been able to enjoy a much greater degree of freedom, Hipkins says. There have been fewer funerals because of what we've been able to achieve with our COVID-19 response, and the sacrifice that they have made has been a big part of that. I don't for a moment underestimate what a sacrifice that has been for some people. I think New Zealanders do accept that we can't live a life of suspended animation indefinitely, Hipkins says. Shift to individual armour risks leaving people behind. The change in the COVID response also means a tipping of the balance away from New Zealand's highly centralised, government-mandated response to one that falls more in the realm of individual responsibility. It is going to be a big shift. It's going to take everybody a little while to get their heads around the new realities and how things will be different. But we're well prepared, Hipkins says. In speeches, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has called it a shift toward individual armour of the vaccine. While New Zealand's initial response depended on the fortress walls protecting everyone inside, its new strategy means people need to strap on their own chainmail vaccines, boosters, isolation plans, mask supplies. New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has called the country's changing COVID strategy as a shift towards individual armour. Photograph, Hagen Hopkins at Getty Images. Epidemiologists and health experts say the shift to individual protection also has far more scope to leave people behind, those who either won't or can't don their own armour. That includes children too young to be vaccinated, marginalised groups with less access to healthcare and lower vaccination rates, the immunocompromised, and those with multiple health issues.